Hello, I thought it'd be fun to tear down and repair this Amiga 4000 I picked up. And it's kind of fun because I used to use one of these machines back in high school to make all kinds of graphics and games and stuff like that. This particular one was sitting in a recycling bay at a local school, and it had 3 expansion cards sitting loose inside it, and it needs a lot of other repairs, so once we're done disassembling it, we'll fix it all up. So like I said, there were some cards sitting loose inside it, and this is the first one. It's called a YC separator board for a video toaster, and yeah, it's video inputs, and then those get processed and sent along to the video toaster inputs here. The other one that was sitting inside it was this guy. It's called kitchen sink, and I don't have the input board for it or the control board for it, but I found one on eBay for $10. So that's coming. Hopefully we'll be able to play with that. This is what's called a time-based corrector, and what it does is it sets it synchronizes all the refresh rates for analog equipment coming into it, so that the video toaster can switch between all the different inputs seamlessly without the picture rolling. That's its main purpose, at least. And of course, the last board that was in there was this guy, the video toaster itself, and another double layer board. And it's kind of neat. 2 outputs and then 4 inputs, and while their marketing material always said you could do 4 inputs, 4 different inputs, realistically the first input was always dedicated for synchronizing it to the blackburst generator, the TBC, and then you had 3 inputs for usually AB roll, and 1 extra input for whatever you want. And interesting to note that all 3 of these boards were actually made in the USA. And then what's actually underneath this board itself is just a bunch of analog stuff, but I won't bother because these chips are actually not even labeled. But this right here is the actual frame buffer memory for the graphics it can display. So this is the NiCad clock battery that is really problematic on a lot of Amiga desktop computers, A2000, A3000, A4000, and I plan on replacing that with this guy here, basically a button cell. It's kind of interesting. It has a little diode inside there. I suspect because this battery, you can see right here on the top, it says NiCad. The Amiga actually charges it up, so it's always charged up. I'm not sure how useful that is because these NiCad batteries probably destroyed a considerable amount of these machines. And you can see this one's actually okay shape, but you can see a certain amount of corrosion down in here. Luckily, I've tested the machine still boots up. The other thing I want to repair is these SIMM slots. And they work if you push them in just right. They do actually function, but what you see here is that all the connectors and the edges are snapped off in the last 2. So it'll be quite a job, but I think I am up to it. Desoldering that and replacing them with some new ones, and I'll take a look at that later. So this board kind of has two sides to it. There's some custom chips on this side, and then there's some custom chips on the other side where this expansion connector is, and we'll get to those later. I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about those, or the ones we can see right now, and then I'll disassemble all this stuff, and we'll look at the ones behind there. So this, the first chip we're going to look at here is called Super Buster, and basically what it does is bus arbitration. And something I noticed is that it's actually a revision 11 chip, which is the last one they ever made of this, which is nice because the previous versions had a tendency to cause the machine to crash when you were actually using the 03 DMA support. So this one shouldn't have any issues. It's also mentioned too that certain Amiga 4000, this particular chip is actually soldered onto the board, so upgrading it was quite a bit more complicated. So this is the Amiga Lisa chip. It is in charge of all the video stuff, sprites, bit plane graphics. Can do 8-bit color with 18-bit ham mode, which I'll talk about later, I'm sure, but basically means it can do 262,000 colors in a single frame. But anything real time is basically limited to 256 colors. So this is the Amiga Alice chip, and what it's responsible for is all the Amiga DMA for chip memory, and it also has a thing called the video copper coprocessor in it. And the best way to think about the copper is that it basically allows you to set all the memory settings on each horizontal scan cycle, which allows you to do all kinds of really fantastic graphic effects. Probably the most interesting of those would probably be in hardware raster bars that you see in some of those Amiga demos. This is the chip that does that. What we're looking at here are the Amiga CIA chips, complex interface adapter. On a modern day computer, probably be considered a UART of sorts. They basically interface or manage the interface for the serial and parallel ports in the back of the Amiga. What we're looking at here is the Amiga CPU board. It's kind of interesting that this motherboard doesn't actually have a CPU on it. The whole thing sits on this expansion edge connector, which we'll look at in a second. This is the 25 megahertz Motorola 6840. You can see the chip under there. I'm not going to pull the package apart just because it's a lot of work for not much gain. So this is a bit closer look of at the board itself. There's lots of programmable logic arrays and buffers on it. I'm not sure necessarily how it works. It's interesting though to note that Commodore always silkscreen each board with the initials, the last name of the designers for the thing. And that's actually true for the motherboard as well, which we'll look at in a second. So what we are looking at here is this is the expansion board that the CPU sits on. It's typically referred to as the fast slot. This is Gary, the Amiga gate array. Its main job is to act as a floppy controller, and it also is a bus controller for certain other things. What I couldn't quite tell you. And then we have here the Amiga ROM chips, and they say 1992 version 3.0, which is the version it came out of the box with. And then what we have here is the Ramsey chip, which is the memory controller for the system. And in the corner, and sorry for it being sideways, it says it is in fact in a Commodore Amiga 4000 Rev B 1992. It's worth mentioning on the case there's a quality assurance stamp that says it's a bit smudged, but it says 1993, so I think this machine was probably actually made in 93. So worth mentioning, the floppy drive that comes with it actually does work. It's Shannon FZ357A, which is actually the rare elusive high density Amiga floppy drive. And the reason why high density floppy drives on the Amiga were somewhat rare is because for some reason Commodore decided to go with a mode that gave them more space, but also made it so that in high density mode this thing has to spin like half the speed of a PC floppy drive. To be honest with you, it was kind of a pain in the butt back in the day. It's also interesting to note too that the power switch kind of works like an old school oscilloscope. You know, it's got this big rod that goes back and forth. And then the power supply itself is 12 and 5 volts and 120 volts only. So, but I had to actually pull off this the front bezel so I could pull this floppy drive rack out so I could remove a single screw that's below this plate right here to remove the motherboard. What a pain in the neck. Okay. So I don't know. That was pretty difficult, I admit, to desolder. Primarily because there was this joint that went up through here, and let me look on the other side, and yeah, it's looking pretty gross. In fact, if you look a little bit closer at some of these components, you see the green stuff is flowed over. So we're gonna have to clean that up with a bit of rubbing alcohol, I think. So I'll be right back. I don't want to bore you guys too much with what I was doing, but basically I'm just using this solder sucking gun on each of these pads and cleaning the joints off of here. It's the kind of repair I would not wish on anyone, because I think altogether is about 300 pads here to pull off, and it's a really delicate situation because it's not like I can just buy another board to replace this one. And I don't know if you can see that all that well, but some of these pads had some solder in them and they just didn't want to come out too well. So what I found that works pretty well is you take your wick and you put it over the pin where it didn't come out, and then like that, usually gets it. There we go, there's another one right there. Looks like I got, oh, there's the last one right here. Looks like we got it. And there's the component completely removed, but also complete garbage because that right there snapped off and it won't hold the memory in. Okay, so that's all 4 of them, and I'm going to put the replacement parts back in there and resolder the whole thing back in. So to be honest with you, the plan wasn't actually to replace this one on the end, but I found these replacement parts I got in there were slightly wider than the factory ones, and the chip memory one ran right up against it. So I went ahead and desoldered all of them. Okay, what I've done is I've tacked the corner of each SIMM socket, the replacement that is, on each corner, so I can flip this around and inspect that these are all level, and they look okay to me, so I'll go ahead and finish resoldering the rest of these 300 joints back together. Okay, we're done, and I also replaced the battery with that part I mentioned earlier. Now this black gunk that you see on here is basically flux, and what I'll do to get rid of that is toothbrush and some rubbing alcohol. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll give it a visual inspection, maybe do some continuity testing, make sure that nothing's shorted out, and we'll switch it on. Okay, I've gone and repopulated the chip RAM and the SIMM banks right here, and I've attached the hard drive and the CPU tower, and I believe it will boot without the rest of the hardware, so let's let it rip and see if it works. Hopefully it does. Alright, it booted, and we have 16 megabytes of fast RAM, so it worked. If it's possible to check the clock while we're at it. It says 2014. Because I didn't attach the keyboard, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to button up the rest of the machine and we'll play with it a bit, and then that'll be the end of the video. Okay, I promised that once the machine was fixed, we'd play around with it, kind of see what the Amiga 4000 was all about. So here it is running, and I've loaded a bunch of different applications onto it, but I think most people bought the A4000 to play around with the video toaster. And the way I've got that working is the video toaster is plugged in to this little thing used to transfer DVDs to a PC, and it works pretty well. Let's go ahead and get that going. Please stand by. Okay, so what we have here are essentially what they call the main and preview video bus, and so all your recording equipment would be attached to this guy here, and then all your stuff you're going to switch to is attached to this stuff here. So typically you'd have like two monitors set up over here, one to see what you're going to switch to and one to see what is actually running. And then all of these guys are just the transitions to go from A to B, and of course that would be superimposed in the video. I'll have to do a more in-depth review of this because I do actually have some analog inputs I can connect up to it if anyone's interested. I think most people, even more people actually bought this to use a thing called LightWave 3D, so I thought I'd play around with that real quick and then end the video. So to get into that, you just click that, and here it is, and load the benchmark scene called Texture Examples. Texture Examples. There we are. And if I move the mouse around too, it will actually change the perspective of what I'm looking at, so I can edit the scene. Again, it's another one of these things that you could probably make an entire video on. But to make this into a frame, I just click Render, and I only want to do the first frame. And I don't care about saving the files. So I'll click OK, and it will actually render it for me. We'll see how fast it does it. It's interesting as well that this same scene on a modern version of LightWave, and I think they're up to what, version 14 or something, is pretty much instantaneous on a modern computer. But I remember back in the early 90s this was actually pretty quick. Last part. What this workflow is all about, by the way, is that before the advent of hard disk recorders, what you'd do is you'd render each frame to the video toaster frame buffer, and then a frame accurate VCR would record each frame as it went. And so a real animation, this would take all night, and you'd see your animation, or maybe a horrible mess in the morning. Have to redo it. There we go, and it says rendering time 2 minutes 59 seconds, which is, it's surprising how slow it is. I guess how slow it feels these days, because I guess I'm used to a faster machine. But that is it in a nutshell, and let me know if you want to see anything else on the computer in the comments below. I can probably set it up and make it work.